I don't think there's anything wrong with shaming rich people for their really astronomical impact on climate change. Welcome back to my channel. I do video essays on the intersection between climate change and social justice, and today this is a conversation that some of you guys are not ready to have. Today I'm going to be talking about how poor people or low-income people are scapegoated by the environmental community and how this shows the inherent classism in environmental policy and environmental activism. And we're going to be touching on some of the biggest ways that I kind of see this scapegoating happening, and this includes the argument for population control, telling people to stop buying fast fashion, and also just how it seems to me like a lot of sustainable swaps and sustainable changes deal more with the individual rather than focusing on bigger issues that kind of target middle and upper income people. So that's what we're going to be touching on, and then at the end I'm going to kind of give my analysis on certain things that I think we could do to have these conversations in a more equitable way. So what exactly do I mean by scapegoating? A person or group may bear the blame for others or to suffer in their place. Scapegoat is basically a person that you blame for something going wrong, even if they weren't the cause of it. So oftentimes we see scapegoating happening in the US because of immigrants. People point to immigrants as the cause for violence or as the cause for why people don't have jobs. But once the immigrants leave, then the economy suffers. So clearly it's not the immigrants that were causing the issues, but people want something to point to, so then they'll point to a scapegoat. I believe that oftentimes poor people are the scapegoat of the environmental community. We blame poor people or low-income people for so many issues, and I feel like an unequal amount of burden is placed on low-income people to make environmental changes. So today I'm going to be looking at some examples of the scapegoating, the ones that I think are the most prevalent as an individual. Obviously there's other ways that poor people are scapegoated, but these are the ways that I think are the most prominent. So the first one is the idea of population control. Then we're also going to be talking about quitting fast fashion. And then finally, I'm going to touch on zero-waste swaps and like the sustainability movements, the kind of messaging that we see. So as I mentioned in my video on environmental racism, a lot of times the people who suffer the most from environmental destructions are the ones that are actually doing the least. So first, the conversation on population control. Like I mentioned earlier, this is something I wanted to put in this video because it's something that like deeply disturbs me and I want to talk about it basically, and that's what my channel is for, just talking about things I want to talk about. So basically the idea of like population control as a way to combat climate change, it's pretty simple. Just decrease the population. The logic is just not there. It's not giving. Not only is it just not scientifically accurate at all, these ideas of like population control are deeply rooted in white supremacy, and once again they just aren't. They just don't make sense. The concept is pretty simple: less people, less environmental destruction. But when you kind of look closer into it, you realize how illogical it is because of how different types of people have a different impact. You can kind of compare the impact of me, this average Joe, just living my life in my little bedroom, compared to like someone like Jeffree Star who has $1 million mansion, lives in a house all by himself. His house is probably like 10 times as big as mine, and I have roommates and he doesn't. Comparing our kind of impacts, you can understand how 10 people who have a Jeffree Star lifestyle are not going to have the same impact as 10 people who have my lifestyle. And when you multiply it by the millions and billions, then you can see how this gap of like population versus environmental impact isn't like one-to-one. It's really not. Not to mention the ethical dilemma of controlling the population. Obviously you can do it by just asking nicely. If that doesn't work, then that's where you get the one-child policy that China did, and it's just wrong. And there's also been stories of forced sterilization in developing countries, which is so absolutely sickening. Ugh, it's disgusting. The number does have an impact, but the more important factor is to consider kind of the strength of the environmental destruction, and that's what the population control theorists aren't really doing, especially with like its roots in white supremacy. It was basically just a way to justify wanting there to be less brown people. Like, it's pretty simple. It's just racism. So next, quitting fast fashion. So you've all seen these videos. I quit fast fashion, why I don't buy fast fashion anymore. And then on the other side, you see people still buying like $300 worth of really cheaply made clothing from Shein, and this kind of divide of like over-consumerism versus not no consumerism, because eco-consumerism is a thing. Basically, there's just the people who don't buy fast fashion and then the people who are just like all for it and love Shein. And the interesting thing is, both of these groups engage in their own way of scapegoating poor people in the environmental movement. Even though one side is like the unsustainable side and the other side is sustainable, both of them are engaged in classism, and it's less about who consumes and who doesn't. It's more about privilege. So the first thing that I've kind of noticed is from the people who are still shopping fast fashion. I have this video where I kind of talk a little bit more about fast fashion and kind of my thoughts on it, and like, I don't shame people for buying from fast fashion. A lot of people don't even understand the impact of it yet, and so it's more about like explaining it and being empathetic to different people, but I'm not empathetic to these groups of people specifically. And I'm talking about the people who have kind of learned about how unsustainable fast fashion is. They're learning about why they shouldn't shop fast fashion, and their go-to answer as to why they continue to do it is that poor people can't not buy from fast fashion, which, if you watch this video, I agree with. Oftentimes people from low-income communities, all they can afford is Forever 21. All they can afford is the fast fashion. That is 100% true. What that doesn't mean is that everyone gets to shop fast fashion because poor people have to. You can't use someone else's struggle as a reason as to why you get to benefit from something. I.e. in the situation why you get to shop fast fashion just because other people can't. Like financially, if you're able to make that shift away from fast fashion and you understand the implications of continuing to shop fast fashion, at that point you just have to realize that you're the problem.
Is it me? Am I the drama? I don't think I'm the drama.
And then another adjacent thing that is less about individuals and more about like capitalism. People who are in the fast fashion industry, they're able to justify continuing to make these really cheap clothing by saying they employ these people from like poor countries and they're giving them a job, so therefore they should continue to make the fast fashion because they're giving people jobs. I call BS. Basically, they're just trying to justify their actions by saying if they stopped producing fast fashion, then it would harm these communities more than they're harming them. So it's just like a justification for harming these people because it could be worse, basically. There's a word for it I learned in my ethics class in college, but I just completely forget the word. Like I mentioned in my Jeff Bezos video, these CEOs are not charity. They do not give a about the working conditions of the people who make their clothing. They're only saying these things as a way to justify continuing to harm these communities. If they were actually empathetic to the fact that their workers are suffering, they would have better working conditions. They would increase the pay even if they don't have to. The last kind of thing I see in this whole fast fashion thing is people in the sustainability movement and environmentalists shaming people who aren't able to quit fast fashion. This is absolutely heartbreaking to see. So I used to be in some Facebook groups about sustainability and like sustainable swaps. A lot of what I was seeing in these groups was people who maybe did quit fast fashion proving their ignorance to different struggles, especially financially, by like saying things like, oh, there's no excuse for shopping fast fashion, just admit that you don't care. Not being empathetic to the fact that some people actually do not have the money to spend $300 on a sustainable tank top like you do, Becky. Shaming people who aren't able to quit fast fashion as fast as you did or quit fast fashion at all is not the way to go, and it's just like alienating more people from the environmental movement, and I hate seeing it. So finally, let's talk about zero waste swaps, sustainable policy, all wrapped into one beautiful pie. Something that I noticed pretty quickly in the environmental movement is how much of a concentration there are on zero waste swaps that are like individual changes and like swaps and like really little things you can do, which I think is great because it does give people more of a chance to have a personal impact. What I really did not appreciate, and I think we've done a better job of moving away from it and moving more into what I want to see more of, which is talking about sustainability in a way that focuses more on how middle and upper income classes have a much more pronounced impact on environmental change. So therefore, they should be the ones making the swap. They should be downsizing their homes. They should be driving better cars, because it's not Stacy from like a tiny apartment in Brooklyn who's causing climate change as much as freaking Jeffree Star living in like a 30-bedroom house by himself. I don't think there's anything wrong with shaming rich people for their really astronomical impact on climate change. I really don't see a problem with it. I think that like in the past, we definitely saw a lot of sustainable swaps that focused on things that I guess everyone could do, but what this ends up doing is putting a lot of a burden on lower and kind of lower middle class. So I think when it comes to sustainable swaps, we need to talk more about the swaps that impact rich people. Like flying private jets is one thing that I will never understand. Like, you can't share the same air as peasants? Like, it actually frustrates me how much of an impact private jets are, and they're so pointless. Like, obviously if you're like literally dying and you need to be airlifted to a hospital somewhere, take that. Like, I don't care how much CO2 you dump into the air, but some people just getting on a private jet to just go on vacation or to go to the city over just because it's faster, or like helicopter, frustrates me so much. That's what we need to be talking more about. And it's the same when it comes to policy and kind of in government. Oftentimes the things that are passed are the things that have the least of an impact, and they're the things that impact poor people and lower income people the most, even though they're not like the biggest culprits of climate change. So one thing is plastic straw bans. So this isn't necessarily something that impacts poor people, but specifically impacts people who have disabilities. Starbucks literally banned plastic straws, but they still sell plastic cups. Like, I mean, I guess go off, but finish your sentence. A lot of municipalities are more inclined to ban plastic bags, which is a really simple, like symbolic, like really quick thing you can do, rather than something that's going to have a much bigger impact. But instead, we're just gonna ban plastic bags. Okay, pop off. Not even. Sometimes they just do like a plastic bag tax. Yeah, they do that. So now you're taxing poor people to fight climate change, even though like there's way bigger fish to fry. I remember seeing this video on like a day in the life of a sustainability, or day in the life of someone who's zero waste, and a part of it that really threw me off was when she was like, oh, even when I'm flying, I will not accept food that comes in plastic when I'm flying. Like, I just won't do it. I'd rather just like starve and eat when I get to where I'm going. And I just remember watching that and being like, but sis, you're on a flight. Like, did you consider how much CO2 you're burning? But her concern is some plastic Tupperware that she's gonna get on the flight, rather than the fact that she's flying to begin with. Obviously, I'm not saying never fly again, but that's just an example of how we focus more on like, oh, why are you buying food in plastic, rather than being like, this, like, you're flying. Like, think about how much privilege is inherent in that, and then think about how much of a bigger impact that will have, rather than like someone just buying food in plastic because that's all they have access to. So just think about that. So what exactly are some solutions? So I think I would love to do a video in the future where I talk more in depth in like solutions when it comes to classism and the environmental movement, but I just came up with some like broad ones just to like give you guys a little taste. So first is to center poor people in these kinds of conversations. I feel like this is something that you hear all the time, like center blank. You obviously can't center everyone at the same time, but every once in a while we need to consider how certain policies more or less impact different economic demographics, and then we can consider that in the policy making process. Obviously, every business needs to consider how their sustainability model impacts different socioeconomic backgrounds, and cities obviously need to consider how different environmental regulations and mandates impact poor people versus upper income people, and kind of cater less to rich people, because rich people, they've been winning. They don't need help. So instead, they need to focus more on how they can help lower income people to be more sustainable. So that's what I mean by centering. It just means sometimes maybe think about poor people. Is that hard? Is that too much to ask for? So next, and I said this a lot in this video, but to be empathetic, to consider how certain policies, how certain environmental changes impact poor people, because guess what? Poor people have feelings too. And I know we have a rich history in this country of like criminalizing homelessness, of basically perpetuating cycles of poverty and not understanding how we can help poor people to get out of poverty and how this is best. Finally, I think it's important to think outside your community. So like I mentioned earlier, centering other communities. And I feel like I could literally make this video about how queer people are mistreated by the environmental movement. And I've basically made a video on how POC are treated in the environmental movement. Yeah, we just need to consider more how different communities are harmed by not just environmental destruction, but how they're impacted by the solutions, and kind of understand how we can make sure that we are not perpetuating more harm on these communities with our sustainable solutions. So that being said, that was it for today's video. I really hope you guys enjoyed today's topic. This isn't something that I like think anyone is Googling. Like, is anyone looking into this? Probably not, but I really hope you guys enjoyed this video nonetheless. And if you have any other topics you want me to share about, I love sharing my opinion even if nobody asked. So comment down below and I can talk about something that you care about, but if it's about sustainability or like Paris, I'm good to talk about Paris as well, then leave it in the comments. That being said, I'm going to have my Twitter and my Instagram linked down below, so you can follow me on other social media platforms in case YouTube is the next platform that decides to just like spontaneously combust for a couple hours. Also, thank you to my patrons for helping Thank you to my patrons for helping me make amazing content. If you want to support me on Patreon, the link is going to be in the description. When I hit 100 patrons, I'm going to be doing monthly, I was gonna say webinars, but no, I'm not teaching y'all nothing. I'm going to do monthly live streams, where monthly or weekly, I still can't decide depending on like what y'all want. Obviously on Patreon I could do weekly if you guys want that, because I do love talking and I love engaging with the community, so I could do weekly, but maybe monthly conversations where we can just talk about sustainability and whatever. You can ask me questions, get to know me. So subscribe or follow or join my Patreon if you want that exclusive perk, and also post like behind the scenes. I'll post videos early if I'm done with them early, and just all that good stuff. Why do I always press this button? That being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye everyone.